Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In July of 2015, thousands of people gathered along the river for a weekend of music, camping, and wakeboarding. The annual event, known as WakeFest, was supposed to be a carefree summer getaway, a place where friends could relax, drink, and enjoy the water. But by the end of that weekend, one of the campers would be dead. A 21-year-old young lady had been camping on a steep cliff overlooking the river with friends she trusted. Sometime during the night, she disappeared from the campsite. Hours later, her body was discovered hundreds of feet below in the water. At first, investigators believed it was a tragic accident. But when her family began asking questions, they uncovered troubling details that didn't seem to add up. Injuries that appeared inconsistent with a simple fall, a chaotic campsite, conflicting witness statements, and a crime scene that many believe was never properly investigated. More than a decade later, the circumstances surrounding her death remain fiercely debated. Was it truly an accident? Or did something far more sinister happen on that cliff that night? This is Forensic Tales, episode 329, The Mysterious Death of Lauren Agee. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly crime podcast with a forensic twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used to uncover the truth. If you enjoy deep dives into real cases and the science behind them, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you want even more content, including monthly full-length bonus episodes and early ad-free access to over 300 episodes, you can join our community over on Patreon. The support there truly helps keep the show going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/forensictales. And one small favor that makes a huge difference for the show, if you're enjoying Forensic Tales, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other listeners discover the podcast. Picture this for a moment. You're 21 years old and it's summertime in Smithfield, Tennessee. It's warm, a little humid, and the temperature is somewhere around 85 degrees. You're spending the weekend at Center Hill Lake in DeKalb County, a place known for great fishing and boating. But you're not there for any of that. You're there for the lake's annual wakeboarding event called WakeFest, a weekend that draws thousands of young people each year to relax, drink, enjoy the water, and of course, watch pro wakeboarders take to the water. All around the shoreline, you see boats drift lazily across the water while music blasts from portable speakers. Campers have pitched tents along the rocky cliffs that overlook the lake, some of them perched surprisingly close to the edge. Coolers are packed with drinks. People are swimming, laughing, and meeting new friends. For you and everyone else out there, it's a weekend escape from work, school, and everyday responsibilities. As the sun begins to set behind the hills, the energy of the event only grows stronger. Bonfires flicker to life along the campsites. Music carries through the warm night air. People wander from campsite to campsite, talking, drinking, and enjoying the freedom that comes with a summer weekend on the lake. All of that sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? For most of the people at WakeFest in the summer of 2015, the weekend would be remembered as exactly what it was meant to be, a carefree few days with friends. But for the young woman I'll be talking about in this episode, the weekend would end in tragedy. At around 4:30 in the afternoon on Sunday, July 26, 2015, a man and his adult son, Lynn and Dylan Blair, were out on the lake fishing. They weren't there for WakeFest. They were just there to hopefully catch some fish and have some father-son time. But instead of reeling anything in with their poles, they made another discovery floating in a cove near the cliffside. From a distance, they thought it was just a large piece of trash. That wouldn't be uncommon with so many people there that weekend. But as they steered their boat closer, it became obvious it wasn't trash. It was the body of a young female wearing bright pink shorts, lying face down in the water. Instead of jumping in the water themselves, the son told his dad they should turn the boat around and get help from the police. He actually worked as a paramedic, so he could tell pretty much by looking at the body that there wasn't anything they were going to be able to do. And in a case like this, the last thing you want to do is interfere with a potential crime scene. So when they got back to the shore, they encountered two off-duty police officers who were working as security guards for the wakeboarding event. They were Chris Yarchuk and Ryan Melanson with the White County Sheriff's Office. So the two of them decided to go out there on the water and see for themselves. They could tell just by looking at her that the young lady had some type of trauma to her head. They just couldn't tell where it came from or how she got it. They also knew this wasn't a situation for two off-duty police officers to handle on their own. So they made their way back to shore and called both the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office and the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. The investigation would ultimately be handled by the Sheriff's Office, which, as we're about to discuss later in this episode, may or may not have done a very thorough job investigating. But while officers Yarchuk and Melanson were waiting for someone from either one of these agencies to show up, they saw two young men inside a canoe paddling toward where the young woman's body was. So they started shouting at them to stay away. This was potentially an active crime scene with a dead person in the water. But instead of listening or turning around, the two young men just shouted back that they were looking for a missing friend. When all of this was happening in real time, officers Yarchuk and Melanson had no idea how exactly these two guys knew about the floating body. Did they assume something was going on because of all the commotion in the area? Or did they have some inside knowledge about what happened to this young lady? It was strange because they were headed straight to the location of the body, like they already knew where it was. It seems like the two off-duty officers thought they knew something about the situation that they didn't. So while they waited for the sheriff's office to arrive, they began questioning the two guys. They were Aaron Lilly and Christopher Stout, two names you'll be hearing a lot about through this episode. And the young lady found lying face down, dead in the lake, was 21-year-old Lauren Agee. I know this phrase is thrown around a lot, especially in podcasts, but Lauren really had everything going for her. She was incredibly beautiful, she was smart, she was athletic, she was kind and friendly, she danced everywhere she went. She was really the whole package and had become a young woman her mom, Sherry Smith, was very proud of. In 2015, she had the world in the palms of her hands. She was 21 years old and had been born on August 19th, 1993 in Biloxi, Mississippi. She lived in Hendersonville, Tennessee, with her mother, Sherry, stepfather, Michael, and three siblings, Allison, Jordan, and Joshua. Something I mentioned just a minute ago was that Lauren loved to dance everywhere she went. She was so talented at dancing that she had even gotten a scholarship for it, but turned it down to study criminal justice at a local college. She also had a boyfriend who she was very serious about. Some of Lauren's friends even said she had told them she thought he might be the one. It was summer break when Lauren approached her mom, Sherry, about going to WakeFest with Hannah Palmer, a girl she had known for many, many years and went to high school with. It was a 3-day-long event, and there would be a ton of other young people there. At first, I don't think Sherry was too thrilled about the idea. The main purpose of WakeFest is to watch people wakeboard out on the lake. But she knew that wasn't the only thing people did. To be blunt, it was an alcohol-fueled party weekend for people of Lauren's age. So as a mom, I think she worried about her daughter, as any mom probably would. But since she was an adult, there really wasn't anything she could say other than to be careful. I also read articles that suggested Sherry wasn't too crazy about Hannah. She just didn't think she was a very good friend to her daughter. So, on top of this being a party weekend, she wasn't too happy about the person she was going with. But a 21-year-old girl is going to do what a 21-year-old wants. So that weekend in July, Lauren headed out the door with her friend Hannah and told Sherry they were planning to stay in a cabin, which turned out to be a lie. They definitely weren't staying in a cabin. If they had, probably none of this would have happened, and that was the last time Sherry ever saw her daughter alive. Lauren and Hannah arrived together at WakeFest on Friday, July 24th. Many of the reports I read while researching said Lauren thought it was just her and Hannah that weekend. But as it turned out, Hannah had invited her boyfriend, Aaron Lilly, and his friend Christopher Stout, the two names I just mentioned. I don't know if Lauren was upset about the extra people, but it definitely wasn't what she expected or planned for. Instead of staying in a cabin, as Lauren had told her mom, the group of 4 set up camp on a cliff accessible only by canoe. And like almost every girl their age, Lauren and Hannah documented the whole trip on social media and on their cell phones. So while the group was canoeing out to the cliff, Lauren started recording them. And on the video, you can hear one of them saying something like, "We're going into a death trap." Obviously, it was a joke, but I think they knew just how sketchy this campsite really was. So once the group canoed across the lake and reached the cliff, they had to climb up the 90-foot cliff face by holding onto a thin white rope. Then once there, they set up a makeshift campsite with a single tent and a hammock. To get back down to the bottom, they would either have to jump off the side of the cliff or traverse back down on the sketchy white rope. That might not sound very dangerous to some of you, but keep in mind, they would be drinking this entire weekend. So not only did they have to climb this cliff sober, they would have to do it while drinking all weekend long. But maybe when you're young, you don't really think about these things as being dangerous. You're just excited to be there and camp out in a place they think is really cool. There was also very little to no supervision. The event had some off-duty police officers who acted as security guards, the ones we talked about a little earlier. But besides that, there wasn't really much supervision, so people could pretty much camp wherever they wanted. One question you might be asking yourself is, where do they go to the bathroom? Well, the group set up a designated area where you would have to hold on to a tree branch as you leaned away from the cliff. Something else that sounds incredibly dangerous about this camp spot. The reason I bring this up is that that's going to be a theory one of Lauren's friends offers a little later. The plan was for Hannah and her boyfriend, Aaron, to sleep together in the tent while Lauren and Christopher shared the hammock. Let's now talk about that particular hammock, because it's also a very important part of this story. While I don't think Lauren was too thrilled about sharing a hammock with a dude she just met, I think she was really excited about the view she had. The way they set it up between 2 trees and just a couple of feet from the cliff's edge offered really stunning views of Center Hill Lake. In hindsight, strapping a hammock to 2 trees just a couple of feet away from a 90-foot drop sounds like a terrible idea. For many people, that's an accident waiting to happen. But I don't think it was something that Lauren and her friends thought too much about. But knowing what we know now, that hammock may be a very important part of this story. One last thing I'll say about their campsite is that it wasn't an official WakeFest campsite. That means there weren't any fences or safety guards. It was completely unregulated by the event organizers. There were actually designated areas where people were supposed to camp during WakeFest, cabins and official campsites set up for attendees. But a lot of people chose to camp outside those areas, including along the cliffs nearby. It wasn't exactly unusual. In fact, it had become pretty common over the years because the area was easy to access and close to the event. The organizers of WakeFest knew people were doing it, but since that land wasn't actually theirs, there wasn't much they could do about it. Saturday, July 25th was the group's first full day on the lake, and for the most part, they spent it drinking, watching pro wakeboarders, and cliff diving. However, one of Lauren's jumps didn't go very well. The lake was covered with hidden, sharp rocks, and during one of these cliff dives, she apparently hit her head pretty hard on one of them. She might have even blacked out for a few minutes. But Lauren eventually came to and didn't want to seek medical treatment or anything. She just wanted to continue having a good time. So whether she actually got hurt or not isn't really known. It's also possible that alcohol may have masked some of her pain, and she didn't really know just how bad it was. Later that night, Lauren, Hannah, and the boys ended up at a nearby bar. There were also a few other people at the bar that Lauren knew, including her friend Cassie Franks, who went to the same high school as Lauren and Hannah and had actually dated Aaron in the past. Cassie would later say that Lauren seemed like she was having a good time, but mentioned something about not wanting to stay at the campsite they had set up. She just didn't feel comfortable sharing that hammock with a guy she had just met. Plus, like I mentioned earlier, she had a boyfriend. So I don't think he would be too thrilled about that idea either. Lauren even reportedly asked Cassie if she could spend the night where she was staying, but there just wasn't any room for her. I'm sure Cassie regrets saying that, knowing what she knows now. Had she known her friend was about to be in danger, she probably would have done everything in her power to find a place for Lauren to spend the night safely. When the bar closed down at around 2 o'clock in the morning, the group made their way back to the campsite. Once again, Hannah and Aaron took the tent while Lauren and Christopher hopped in the hammock, suspended 90 feet above the water. It's also worth mentioning that all four of them were pretty intoxicated at this point. And in case you want to see photographs of all of this, I'll be posting them to the website and on our social media page. You can find them at forensictales.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I think it's important to see these photos so you get a good picture of how this could have happened. The following morning was Sunday, July 26th, the final day of WakeFest. What happened next can only be reported by 3 people, Hannah, Aaron, and Christopher, because Lauren is no longer here to tell us her side of the story. That's because sometime after around 2:30 in the morning, Lauren fell from their campsite and ended up in the water. Her body wouldn't be discovered until hours later, at around 4:30 that afternoon. That timeline is very important for what I'm about to talk about next. And if you're anything like me, you want to know why it took so long to find her. Don't worry, we'll get there. According to Hannah, she was the first one to wake up that morning. And when she walked over to the hammock, she only saw Christopher. There was no sign of Lauren anywhere. She said she woke him up and asked where her friend was, but he said he didn't know. He then said something I find very strange. He said he thought she had probably woken up in the middle of the night and gone somewhere. But where would she have gone? And why? Plus, all of her personal items were still at the campsite, including her wallet, cell phone, and purse. Even her flip-flops were found sitting underneath the hammock. So how was she supposed to climb down a 90-foot cliff without shoes? It's possible Christopher didn't mean anything by that comment, but it has to make you stop and wonder what was going through their minds. Did they really believe she could have gone somewhere in the middle of the night without taking any of her stuff with her? Or was there another reason to make a comment like that? To be honest, when I heard the next part of the story, I almost threw my computer against the wall. I don't like judging other people's behavior, but I think we can all agree that what happened next is just downright bizarre. Hannah, Aaron, and Christopher didn't alert anyone that Lauren was missing. Instead, they enjoyed the final day of WakeFest together. They drank, they listened to music, they socialized, they watched the pro wakeboarders. It was like Lauren being missing wasn't a big deal. They would later say that they figured she had gone to the festival early in the morning without them. I don't know if the outcome would have changed if they had reported Lauren missing earlier, but it's just so sad to hear that none of her friends did anything. I know she's an adult, so she could do whatever she wanted and didn't have to tell her friends anything. But I'd like to think that if something like that happened to one of my friends, I'd do something about it. I would look for them. I wouldn't just go about my day as if nothing happened. Going back to Sunday afternoon, when Lauren's body was discovered in the lake, and Christopher and Aaron were seen trying to get to her, I mentioned earlier how the off-duty officer thought it was strange that these two guys were looking for her. It's strange because, at that point, there had been no public announcement about a body, so it's like, on one hand, they said they thought Lauren was somewhere at the festival by herself, again, without any of her personal items with her. But on the other hand, they're in a canoe searching the water for her before any announcements have been made about a body. It just doesn't make much sense to me. The first question the two off-duty officers asked Aaron and Christopher was, "What does your missing female friend look like?" And based on their description, the officers knew right away that the body in the water had to be their missing friend, Lauren. But when the officers told Aaron and Christopher that, they didn't really seem too surprised. At least, not according to the officers' statements afterward. We all know that everyone responds to shocking or devastating news differently. So we don't want to judge someone too much for how they react in a situation like this. You also have to keep in mind that maybe their reactions were a little strange because they didn't know Lauren very well. Still, it made the two officers look at them with a little bit of suspicion. Even if you just met Lauren that weekend, wouldn't you be a little devastated to find out that she was found dead, floating in the lake? Even if that happened to a complete stranger at the same event I was at, I'd be totally devastated. So I think the police officers just found their behavior to be a little odd, not criminal, but definitely strange. But then the conversation got a little weirder. According to a Fox 17 News article, Aaron really wanted to dominate the conversation. He didn't want his friend to do any of the talking. He wanted to do it all. I think it was even during this first conversation that the boys wanted a lawyer. And these two officers were already a little familiar with both Aaron and Christopher. Since they had worked security all weekend, they saw them around. They had even seen Lauren the night before. The two officers told ABC's 2020 that they had actually met Lauren at the bar. They said they saw her and her three friends leave the bar around 2 a.m. after a night of drinking, and they watched the four of them walk down the dock by the lake. The group consisted of everyone we've talked about so far: Lauren, her friend Hannah Palmer, Palmer's boyfriend Aaron Lilly, and his friend Christopher Stout. After the initial interview, Officer Chris Yarchuk went up to the campsite to retrieve Lauren's personal belongings. He really wanted to find her ID so he could officially identify her and obtain her information to notify her parents. And as he's going through the campsite, he's also noticing just how dangerous it really was. While he was at the campsite, Officer Ryan Mellinson was still on the boat with Christopher. They were just making small talk when all of a sudden, the officer caught Christopher looking at his gun. So he's like, "What's going on? Why are you staring at my weapon?" And reportedly, Christopher said something like, "I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get that gun and get off this boat. At first, the officer thinks this kid must be kidding. But then Christopher apparently said it again. So by this point, the officer knew he wasn't kidding and wanted to get off the boat as quickly as possible. No one really knows why Christopher said that or what he really meant. And nothing bad ended up happening. Maybe he was intoxicated when he said it. I'm not entirely sure. But it's just yet another strange detail to this already very strange story. When Lauren's parents got the call about what had happened, they were beyond devastated. This was their little girl who was supposed to be having a friend weekend with one of her childhood friends, and now she was dead. I can't even imagine what Lauren's mom thought when she first heard the news. She just had a bad feeling about this trip, and now her worst nightmare came true. So naturally, they wanted to know everything. What happened to her? How she died? Who was she with? They wanted to know everything. But instead of getting the answers to any of those questions, things only got more confusing. An autopsy revealed that Lauren's cause of death was blunt force trauma and possible drowning. Her death was ruled an accident, and the case was closed by the sheriff's office. The basic storyline became Lauren was intoxicated and accidentally rolled off the hammock she shared with Christopher and plummeted to her death. A toxicology report would show that at the time of her death, her blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit. I don't think there's any dispute that she had been drinking that day. But according to her family, the amount of alcohol reported on her autopsy report may be higher than how much she actually had to drink. They believe that the amount listed doesn't mention the medically recognized potential for fermentation of alcohol post-death, which can sometimes result in raised levels being found. So it's hard to say exactly how much Lauren had to drink that night. Again, I think it's fair to say that she had been drinking based on witness statements and observations, but just how intoxicated was she at the time of her death? There's still a little bit of a mystery surrounding that question. And in a case like this, those little details matter. So the theory quickly became that she was drunk and fell off the cliff, hitting her head on the way down and ultimately drowning in the lake below. But there's another detail about the autopsy you should know about, because it's an important piece of forensic evidence. The forensic pathologist found no water in her lungs, which is a little strange if she had potentially drowned after accidentally falling off the cliff. If she had drowned, you'd expect to see fluid in her lungs, but there wasn't any. Zero. So this detail opens the door to another possibility. Lauren was already dead before she ended up in the water. And if that's the case, this couldn't have been some type of accident. Another piece of forensic evidence Lauren's family would challenge later is the fact that in photographs of Lauren's body that were taken at her autopsy, they say you can clearly see marks on her neck. They describe them as obvious hemorrhages consistent with being held down by the throat. But according to them, none of these neck injuries were noted on the official autopsy report. So why does she have neck injuries that are visible in autopsy photos, but they aren't mentioned anywhere on the official report? The whole purpose of an autopsy is to document and report all injuries on someone's body. You can't just pick and choose which ones to include or only list the ones that fit with a certain narrative. In my opinion, that's a very important piece to this puzzle. So is the lack of water in her lungs. Because the authorities seem to think this was a tragic accident. Lauren was drunk, she accidentally fell off the hammock, tumbled down the side of the cliff, hit her head on the way down, and ultimately drowned in the water below. But if she doesn't have water in her lungs, doesn't that mean she might have already been dead by the time she ended up in the lake? And if she had hemorrhaging on her neck consistent with being strangled, isn't that an important detail as well? Those are just some of the concerns Lauren's family has surrounding the forensic evidence in this case. Trust me, there's still more that we're going to dig into. However, those who disagree and think this was actually an accident might argue this was a case of dry drowning. It's extremely rare, but it happens sometimes. Let's talk more about some of Lauren's injuries. To be clear, I haven't personally seen any of her autopsy photos, but if her family is correct and there's obvious hemorrhaging on her neck, that seems to suggest she was in some type of struggle before her death. I think the most obvious explanation is that someone tried to or was successful at strangling her to death. Another key part of that is that none of these injuries is consistent with a fall, and you don't just have to take her family's word for it. Since Lauren's passing, the family has hired several experts to help them get to the truth. And one of those experts is a retired Los Angeles Police Department homicide investigator with over 30 years of experience investigating deaths. According to him, he believes Lauren was actually murdered. Not only does he point out the neck injuries and lack of water in her lungs, but he also found several what he described as symmetrical injuries to Lauren's back consistent with a body being dragged. Lauren did have some bruising on her body, but according to those reviewing the injuries, they would have expected much more significant bruising if she had fallen from that height. She also had a few minor scrapes, but a fall like that would usually leave behind much more serious injuries, things like deep cuts, heavy abrasions, and lacerations. And those types of injuries just weren't present. Then there were her clothes. According to this death investigator, her clothes just didn't have the marks and scrapes you'd expect to see if she had fallen off the cliff. Her clothes weren't ripped, they weren't torn, they looked relatively fine. There were also parts of her body not covered by clothes. I think if she fell down the side of the mountain, you'd expect to see scrapes on the uncovered part of her body. But there just weren't any. So these are things that Lauren's family says don't make sense. How can you rule this a tragic accident based on some of this forensic evidence? Lauren's mom, Sherry, also says she doesn't recognize the clothes her daughter was wearing, and not even the bra she was wearing was hers. Sherry suspects someone dressed her because the bra straps in the back were all tangled up. Before we get to where this case stands today, there are a few other things worth mentioning. Number one, according to the articles I read while researching, the 3 friends Lauren was with that weekend apparently stayed at the festival, even after learning that Lauren had passed away. And number 2, none of them attended her funeral. But I also want to say that none of them have ever been considered suspects in Lauren's death. Even when questioned, the police mainly just wanted to understand who Lauren was and what had happened in the hours before she disappeared. When Officer Melanson interviewed Aaron and Christopher right after the body was discovered, he thought they seemed extremely nervous during the conversation. According to him, they appeared anxious and didn't show much sympathy while discussing what had happened, something we talked about earlier. Hannah's account of the night also seemed to change several times. At one point, she told investigators that she had seen Lauren talking with an older man near a canoe before going to bed. She also suggested that Lauren might have been planning to meet up with an ex-boyfriend later that night. But that doesn't make much sense because Lauren was reportedly in a happy relationship at the time, and that ex-boyfriend had never previously come up during the investigation. Christopher also told police that Lauren had mentioned meeting someone later that evening, although he didn't know who that person was. Another possibility Hannah brought up was that Lauren might have fallen off the cliff while going to the bathroom. Investigators actually tested that theory by recreating the fall using a dummy, but the results suggested that if someone had fallen from that exact spot, they likely would have survived. So that didn't really explain her injuries either. Investigators also spoke with other people who knew the group. One of them was Lauren's friend, Cassie Franks, whom we talked about earlier. She was Erin Lilly's ex-girlfriend. She apparently told police that their relationship had ended because he had been physically abusive. She even showed investigators photos of injuries she said Erin had caused, including bruises and bite marks. Some people later pointed out that those injuries appeared somewhat similar to marks found on Lauren's body, although the mark on Lauren's chest was ultimately documented as an injury from a fall rather than a confirmed bite mark. Police also interviewed another friend of Lauren's named Jade, who hadn't been at WakeFest but had been texting with Lauren that night. According to Jade, Lauren told her she wasn't having a good time and wanted to leave the festival. At one point, she even asked Jade if she could come pick her up. But Jade said she didn't feel comfortable driving there in the middle of the night because it was dark and she didn't know the area well. Interestingly, Hannah told investigators that Lauren had wanted to drive home herself, even though she had been drinking, and that the group had taken her keys to prevent her from doing that. Other people at the festival later told police they remembered Lauren saying she wanted to leave because she felt like the others were being mean to her. So we are all left trying to figure out exactly what had happened that night, and whether Lauren had really been planning to leave or if something else had happened before she disappeared. Police spoke with a man named Chris Brown, who had been camping nearby with his family that weekend. He told investigators that around midnight, he saw a young man swim up to a dock near where he was staying. The man looked exhausted and upset, and according to Brown, he said he had almost drowned while swimming back from the camping ledge. Brown believed the man might have been Erin Lilly, partly because of his physical appearance and partly because the swimmer was wearing American flag-patterned swim trunks, similar to what Erin had reportedly been wearing that weekend. However, Brown's account has been debated because of the timeline. He believed the encounter happened around midnight, but there was evidence suggesting Lauren had still been seen at a bar with friends closer to 2 a.m. Some people think Brown may have simply been mistaken about the time, while others question whether the sighting was related to the case at all. That now brings us to where the case stands today. The police consider Lauren's case an accident. We spent a lot of time talking about the makeshift campsite she and her friends had set up that weekend. So the theory is just that she somehow fell off the cliff and drowned. But if that's what happened, I have one more question. Why didn't any of the 3 friends she was with hear anything? Especially Christopher, who was sharing the hammock with her. I feel like if she accidentally rolled off the hammock and fell, she would have screamed on her way down. So why didn't anyone hear anything? For Lauren's family, especially her mom, Sherry, who we talked about at the top of the episode, they just don't accept the police's theory that this was an accident. The forensic evidence doesn't line up with a fall or drowning. Her injuries don't. The friends' stories don't make sense. There are just so many unanswered questions to simply write this off as a drunken accident. So not long after Lauren's family received the police reports and autopsy findings, they hired their own private investigator, a woman named Sheila Wysocki. To some of you, that name might sound familiar. We actually talked about Sheila Wysocki in an earlier episode of the show. Episode 279, the 1984 murder of Angela Samota. Back then, Sheila wasn't an investigator at all. She was Angela's best friend. And after Angela was brutally murdered in Dallas, Sheila refused to let the case be forgotten. For years, she kept pushing detectives for answers. Eventually, even becoming a licensed private investigator herself so she could help solve the case. Her persistence paid off. Decades later, advances in DNA testing helped identify Angela's killer, bringing long-awaited answers to her family. Since then, Sheila has worked on dozens of cold cases across the country, often stepping in when families feel like the official investigation isn't going anywhere. And in Lauren Agee's case, that's exactly how her family felt. So they turned to Sheila for help, because by that point, Lauren's loved ones believed there were still far too many unanswered questions about what really happened on that cliff at WakeFest. And Sheila was about to start digging into the case herself. It didn't take Sheila long to reach the same conclusions as Lauren's family. She didn't believe this was an accident. She believes Lauren was killed, possibly strangled, and then placed in the water after she had died in order to make it look like an accident. But that's not all Sheila Wysocki did. She also looked into how the police handled the investigation from the beginning. And to be honest, they didn't do a very good job, especially when it came to collecting potentially important forensic evidence. Number one, the officer in charge of the investigation reportedly only documented a paragraph of notes. That's it. One single paragraph. You'd think a suspicious death would at least have a several-page report, not just a single paragraph. This tells me that they never really considered any possibilities other than an accident. They just saw the campsite and sketchy hammock and wrote it off as a drunken accident. Number two, the lead officer was apparently a rookie, at least when it came to suspicious deaths. So he didn't have the experience or training to handle a case like this. That might explain why he took a few notes. Number three, no sexual assault kit was ever done on Lauren, so we have no way of knowing if she could have been assaulted or not. The police say it's because she was wearing a tampon at the time of her death, so they don't believe she was assaulted. The reason I bring that up is that if Lauren had been killed, the murder might have been the result of a sexual assault. Whoever the perpetrator was, he killed her because he didn't want to get caught. But since a kit was never performed, we don't have any evidence either way. Number four, no other DNA testing was done on her body. We know her body was in the water, but had it been tested properly, there was still a chance at finding foreign DNA that may or may not have led anywhere. All of this is to say, there's just a lot of information we don't have. And a lot of that has to do with how the investigation was handled from the beginning. According to Lauren's mom, Sherry, she asked the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office for her daughter's personal items from that weekend, like her flip-flops and cell phone, but was told the items were lost. In 2016, Sherry Smith filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit against Hannah Palmer, Aaron Lilly, and Chris Stout. In it, she said the friends either intentionally, recklessly, or negligently caused Lauren's death, then tried to cover it up. Another thing mentioned in the lawsuit that we haven't talked about yet is that Lauren's body was found a pretty good distance away from the cliff edge that she had supposedly fallen from. And according to a hydrologist who looked at the case, it would have been impossible for Lauren's body to float against the current to the place where her body was found. So this was something else that her family says points toward foul play. After the lawsuit was filed, all three of Lauren's former friends pleaded the fifth, which basically allows them to remain silent without incriminating themselves. Although Hannah eventually made a statement later on saying, "The profound sadness I experienced when learning of the death of my best friend, Lauren Agee, has only been approached by the painful allegations I somehow contributed to her death." To some people, invoking the fifth just points toward their involvement. It's just yet another thing in a long string of strange behavior, from not telling Lauren the boys were invited, to attending the final day of the festival instead of looking for her when she was already missing, to not even attending her funeral services. To some people, this was just more strange behavior by the people who were last with Lauren that night. The judge ultimately dismissed the lawsuit, saying there was insufficient evidence that Lauren's death was anything other than a tragic accident. But that didn't mean Sherry Smith stopped fighting for her daughter. In 2019, an appeals court ruled that Sherry Smith could, in fact, sue Hannah, Aaron, and Christopher in relation to Lauren Agee's death. However, it's unclear where exactly the lawsuit stands today. As of the time I'm recording this, I wasn't able to find a more recent update. Although Hannah, Christopher, and Aaron's behavior seemed strange to many people, they have always maintained their innocence. And according to an article by The Crime Talk, Hannah and Aaron have apparently since gotten engaged. As of the time this episode is released, the death of Lauren Agee is officially considered an accident, but her family continues to fight to have the case reconsidered as a homicide. They vow to do whatever it takes to get the truth about what really happened to her, and they believe the forensic evidence is on their side. What do you think happened to Lauren on that cliff top in July 2015? Was this a tragic accident like the police said? Or do you have questions about the forensic evidence? Why didn't Lauren have any air in her lungs or stomach? Why was her body found so far away from the cliff she allegedly fell from? What do the strange marks on her neck suggest? Why didn't the police perform a sexual assault kit? How do you explain her friend's odd behavior, even after learning that Lauren was missing? And those are just a few of the many questions I have about the mysterious death of Lauren Agee. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content. You can learn more at patreon.com/forensictales. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.